Hello, awesome role-playing tips game master. Thank you for tuning into this video. I made this video because I have posted an article to the roleplayingtips.com website called Ramping Up Tension in a Roleplay Plot. And I wanted to make a video to accompany this to explain some of the things that were a little bit harder to convey in the article and provide some extra information and tips for you to help you put this recipe to good use. And so why do we want to create tension in a roleplay plot? Well, I have a group that prefers to roleplay. Out of two of my 3 campaigns are totally fine with dungeon crawls and or combat and action scenes. And it's easy to create tension in those kind of scenes because you have declining character health, depleting party resources, and you can throw all kinds of monsters and foes at them at various challenge levels to make the combats more or less deadly. And so that tension is kind of built in to the structure of combat in most RPGs. But when it comes to role-playing, I find that often roleplay devolves into conversation, and there's no tension inherent in that, or the tension fades over time. And so by that I mean it's fun to either act as a character or an NPC, or to portray a character or an NPC, putting yourself in their shoes and trying to figure out how they would talk and what kind of things they would think about to communicate to the characters with in a conversation. But there's no game in it. So to me, a game has a few core elements, such things as uncertainty, a goal, and options. And some options are more effective than others in certain situations, which means now you can involve tactics and strategic thinking. So to make a game out of roleplay means that there needs to be some kind of end goal or win state, some kind of chance of loss, and then the players need to have options that allow them to consider option A versus option B and decide which one's better and go with that. So I want to make a game out of, more of a game at least, out of roleplay, in addition to what you're already doing. And so I've come up with a 3-step process here in order to create tension in a role-playing plot, but just not only creating the tension, but ramping it up, making sure that it's prevalent in throughout the plot and that it increases over time. And so the steps in general here are create a problem, create 3 intensifiers, and create secrets, which I call keys. And then also in this video, I will give you an example and show you some references. So let's talk about the first step in creating a problem. What we want to do here is create like the goals of this in terms of creating a kind of a game out of it is you don't want to script things, right? If you're going to create scripts, like write things down the NPC is going to say exactly, sort of like box text but for roleplay. That's not a very good approach, and that's more limiting to you. It won't feel authentic when you kind of roleplay that NPC, and it will make things quite difficult if the party comes at you with unexpected questions or an unexpected situation where your script is no longer relevant. So instead what we want to do is create dynamic and improv friendly encounters, and allow you, kind of arm you with a method here that gets you role playing in a game like way that accomplishes the purpose here, but not having to do a lot of prep ahead of time. So a caveat here, or what we want to do when we create a problem, is we want to create something that is big enough to hold several encounters. And so by that, I mean we can't solve the problem in just one encounter and the first encounter. The problem gets solved in the final encounter, whether that's 2, 3, or 18 encounters from now. So that's a test. If our problem is small enough that it can be solved in the first contact with the PCs, then we've kind of shot ourselves in the foot. We've done a little bit more work than necessary, and ultimately our game isn't fun because we're going to create a pretty fun scenario here. And then by creating, so if we look at encounters, we can kind of think of them as following kind of 2 different paths. The first is a linear path, and so that means we have an encounter that then sets up the next encounter and then sets up the next one, and consequences and cause and effect. And so we have kind of a linear sequence of encounters. It's almost like dominoes. And so we can create problems that suit that, as long as it's more than just one encounter. However, we can also create things and use this recipe to create episodic encounters. And so what that means is that the problem is an overarching scenario for the adventure, for the plot that you are creating. And that's what in adventure building workshop I call these story overlays. For this exercise, I'm just calling it a problem. But if you have a number of problems or smaller problems or aspects of the big problem that you've kind of laid over your story, then you can make each challenge or each obstacle independent of the others and then solvable within an encounter. So, for example, it's like a TV show where you've got a kind of a longer plot arc, but in any individual episode, it sets up kind of a new situation that the characters and the heroes try to resolve by the end of the episode. But yet, they have taken a step forward or suffered a setback in pursuit of that longer season story arc. And so, the point here is that we can use this technique to serve either GMing style, whether you create a sequence of domino encounters, or the encounters can be considered standalone and they're just related and under the umbrella of your big problem. So I've got a number of examples here of the types of problems that are big enough that can contain multiple encounters, that can't be just solved in one encounter with the snap of the fingers and a lucky die roll, or just really clever and unexpected character tactics in one shot. So, for example, if you have a serial killer, well, to track down the serial killer, in such type plots, there's multiple victim scenes or encounters. There's clues, false leads, and then a different kind of a build-up as the characters get closer and closer to tracking down the identity of this murderer, and then tracking them down to capture or killing them. So a serial killer plot will definitely hold more than one encounter, and so very specific example, if your plot opens with a crime scene, so the characters either stumble upon the victim's body, or they're guards or something, and they're assigned to investigate this crime, well, they're not going to actually capture the serial killer and end the plot in that first encounter. This is just a beginning encounter for them to understand what they've got on their hands here, and then the plot develops. So all of these are examples of ways that you can create plots and problems that are bigger than just a single encounter. And so that's our first step. Figure out a problem, and then we'll develop it in the later steps. The second step is we want to create 3 intensifiers, at least 3 intensifiers. You can create multiple, but we don't want to just rely on one in case it fizzles out, if it doesn't trigger, or if the characters don't really feel it. And so an intensifier is a way to make encounters worse as they progress. So in mid-encounter, something happens to amp up the tension, amp up the chance that the characters will fail or suffer some kind of setback or damage, even if the encounter resolves in their favor. And again, this is all about role-playing encounters. Combat and action encounters have these kind of things built in. You use up your spell slots, you use up one-shot magic items, your health declines, and so on. But in role-playing, it's just conversation normally. So this is what we're trying to solve here. And intensifiers allow us to inject intensity as the conversation is taking place, as the characters are interacting with NPCs. And so why do we want to create intensifiers? We've covered this a little bit already. It's to increase tension and drama. It's also to add a new dimension to standard encounters. So if you have like one trick as your method of making a role-playing encounter more dramatic, then that's going to get tired over time. So if we have a variety of ways to intensify role-playing encounters, then we can keep the gameplay fresh and unexpected, and the players will always be amused. We want to avoid predictability, and we want to challenge the players more. So this speaks to my desire to just have more than conversation take place in a role-play plot. All right, how do we create this? Well, first of all, we have to ramp up the danger. And danger is usually a three-pronged thing that involves urgency. So urgency means something has to be done within a deadline, within a countdown, so that, or there will be something that'll be lost. We also want to increase the danger or the cost. Another way of saying danger is the cost. And we want to up the stakes. Cost is a kind of stakes as well. And then I'll go through some examples of these in a moment. So we'll use mid-encounter developments for the most part to do our intensifiers. And here's some examples of ways to intensify an encounter. So we can use waves. In other words, additional foes drop into an encounter. So in a role-playing sense, they could be conversing with someone, and then another NPC comes in and sabotages the conversation. It puts the characters in the bad light. They cast doubt in the NPC that they need information from, so the NPC is more reluctant to share what the NPCs want, that kind of a thing. So that kind of like this NPC or this agent comes in and just makes it more difficult for the PCs to accomplish their goal that they started out trying to achieve at the beginning of the encounter. You could add hostages. You could add some hazards. You could have just a random encounter added in, some kind of complication and new obstacle. And then for executing the intensifier, we want to add it to the encounter, drop it into the encounter when the momentum shifts. So, for example, most of the time an encounter starts in neutral. In role-playing, right? They go talk to the merchant, they talk to the mayor, the captain of the guard, random passerby, a noble, and they start asking their questions. They might make their introductions, and so all of this is fairly friendly banter, and there's not a whole lot of tension or momentum. Like the conversation just continues going. One way you can add some tension at the start, if you want, is through relationships. So how does the NPC's default stance affect how the party approaches the situation? For example, if I were to approach an ally or a friend, I would converse with them, but it would be much different if I were to approach an enemy. I'd be on my guard. I would probably have some idea of what I would say first, try to set them at ease. I might try to trick them or domineer them in the game, and intimidate them. So we can use NPC relationships to add tension at the start. But let's just say we're starting with neutral, and then we want to add an intensifier to change kind of the energy of the encounter, the complexion of the encounter, to add that tension. So you pay attention to the momentum. And what I mean by that is, let's say the encounter starts to go well for the PCs. Right, they say the right things. The they are role playing well. The face of the group might be charming the NPC, and so things are looking like it's going in the party's favor, in order to get the information or the item that they want from the NPC. So as soon as that momentum starts to go into the party's favor, then bam, we add an intensifier. Mid encounter, we add a complication to suddenly change that momentum. That gets the characters on their back feet, all right, backpedaling a little bit and kind of scrambling to kind of recover the situation, and it's something unexpected to the players. So this thing of uncertainty in games means you never know when something's going to come along to kind of set you back or offer you a new challenge. So as soon as that momentum is starting to build, right, everybody starts kind of assuming things are going well, and then bam, you just hit them with something exciting and different. And now all of a sudden they're kind of their emotions have been kindled here. Opposite, if they're doing badly, let's say you call for a roll for influence or diplomacy or intimidate, and they fail, and so the NPC is mocking them or withdrawing, or it's not going so well. Well, then what you can do is create an intensifier mid-encounter to make it like even worse for them. So how in towards the last third of a show, and in individual situations, but in the last third of the show, the heroes are depleted. They're just barely hanging on, and it looks like they've hit rock bottom, and they're struggling against the villain or whatever the obstacles are. And then when you think it can't get worse, it does, and it gets like now it's a nail biter. You're on the edge of your seat. Like, how are they going to do this? Like They're just, what move could they possibly make? They seem to be totally unable to achieve their objective here. They look totally beaten. And so that's the most exciting part of the situation. And so we can apply that as well. So when the momentum shifts to the negative, we can also drop in an intensifier to make the situation even more perilous, which translates into more excitement for the players. So we want to create 3 intensifiers, and then at least 3 intensifiers, and then use those to flesh out our plot. I'll show you that in a moment, and then drop them in encounters when they shift momentum. And so here's a couple of related links for you. This little symbol here in my mind map shows that you can click on these, and when you download the map, you can open it up, and you can view those articles for a little bit more information on intensifiers. And then the third part of our recipe is we want to create secrets, which I call keys. So I'll just clean this up a bit. So what we want to make a plot out of this is NPC interactions, and then the result of the NPC interactions decide whether the characters are advancing in the plot or not. This is the ultimate goal of it. So if all we had all we needed to do was just have a simple conversation, and that would end the adventure, there would be no plot progress. There would be no story structure that we could then take advantage of to create really exciting stories. So what we want is that story structure, but done through NPC interactions. And so that takes the form of these conditions in order, again, to make a game out of it and challenge the players and add this structure for you to be able to figure out how to GM it. So the characters have to earn the trust of the NPCs that they're talking to in order to get the information to solve the problem. They need to earn the trust to get information that earns the PCs access and resources to ultimately solve the problem. So this is the process that we're going to go through. Now, when I say trust, and I kind of brought up a similar example, or an example of this a moment ago. It doesn't have to be trust. They might use intimidation tactics. They might use blackmail and use various forms of leverage to get what they want. But my default assumption here is that your world is full of friendly and unfriendly PCs, that if they begin to trust the PCs, or the PCs earn their respect, then the NPC will divulge what is required for your plot to advance to the next step. The NPC will give the characters what they need in that encounter to take a step forward to solving the problem. But it doesn't always have to be in the form of trust. It can also be in the form of basically social violence. And so that's what we require from NPC interactions. And we want to do this because we want to ensure that role-play challenges are central to the plot. So again, your characters might be hack and slashers. You try to introduce a role-play plot, fails. Okay, that's fine. Just, this is not going to work for you. But if your characters and players like the role-play stuff, then your default should be to open up more role-play. In other words, when an encounter is done, successful or fail, then you want the next encounter to be more role-play. You don't want to devolve the campaign into just violence again, into the hack and slash stuff that we're used to most of the time. So we want to create secrets as part of the structure to ensure that role-playing challenges stay key to each of the encounters, or most of the encounters, in our role-play plot. So how do we do this? So our adventure solutions require a few questions to be answered. So in other words, if the characters can have these questions answered, then they would know how to solve the problem, and then they would be able to solve the problem. But at the beginning of your role-play plot, they don't have the information they need to unlock the solution. And then how do they get to that solution? Well, we go back to our formula here. This is how they negotiate or interact with each NPC to get these bits of details. So in other words, this is almost like your plan. Okay, who do they have to talk to? What do they have to know? Where do they have to go, either to talk to people or to enact the solution? Is there any timing involved? And then, are there any mechanisms involved in unlocking this information and getting to the solution? How will they put all of these other bits of information together into a solution? And so each ingredient is a key to unlock the problem. And so I think of then these ingredients forming the seed of an encounter. So for example, the who question could be answered in one encounter, and then the what question could be answered in a different encounter, and then the where could be answered in another encounter. The who question could be require 3 or 4 encounters, or they have to have 3 or 4 clues revealed to them through multiple encounters before they can finally piece together this one key to the solution. So it's basically how you want to structure the adventure, whether answers come easy and fast and your adventure kind of resolves quickly, or whether there's a lot of intricate steps involved. And so this is the structure and how to do either. All right, so we want the keys to unlock the problem. And so, for example, there must be people, like the who. There's people performing a ritual that must have, and these people must have 2 specific qualities in common. I mean, this is a pretty abstract example, but if you can figure out what I'm kind of trying to channel here, we have kind of requirements of who they have to talk to or who will help them solve the problem. And then let's say, for example, there's a ritual. Well, that ritual needs 3 special ingredients to answer the what. And then the ritual must be performed at a specific time. And then it must be performed in a specific way. So a recipe, like what must be said or what must be set up. And then, so in the article, I used the ritual as one of the examples. And then a second example I gave was a crime. And so a crime has a motive, means, method, and proof generally, because crimes usually go into some kind of legal framework. That's the ultimate win state of a crime. It's not usually, okay, we find the killer and we kill them. It's usually that you need proof and the other things to establish enough to get justice ultimately. And the third example is a coup. So somebody wants to take over the government, and so a coup needs agents, the who, a method of force, the what, a time, which is when, and a place, which is how, or sorry, which is where. And so your ingredients for the type of plot hopefully open yourself up to those questions to fill in the blanks, and then we can create some plot structure around that. All right, we want to let players drive this process. So a dungeon is nice and neat because it's a map, right? You've got the rooms, they'll connect by corridors and doors and magic portals and things, and it's very, very structured. So everybody understands how to navigate a dungeon by default. But most players do not understand how to navigate the plot. A roleplay plot. And then also game masters have struggle often with figuring out how to structure a roleplay plot so that there can be a progression, a series of events and actions to get to a resolution. So we want to, for the most part, allow players to drive the investigation, the meetings, and figuring out the puzzle about who to talk to get the keys and whatnot. And so with the structure, the good news is that most of this is already taken care of for you. For example, or in other words, we will have the setup so that whatever the players decide to do, we will be able to dynamically and in an improvisational manner keep the plot going for them. So we already have a problem. So we already have like a goal or a win state that the characters are pursuing. So that's kind of like built into this. Why are they going to this effort, right? To solve the problem. Who do they need to talk to? Well, we've already described that and laid that out in answering the who question. Similarly, why do they want to talk to the NPCs? Well, we've got some kind of information they need for the problem solution, like what is it, and then where is it, and when is it, and then what they want from the NPCs. Again, the players can drive this. Like they're going to say, okay, let's go talk to this person because they might know X, or they might have this piece of the puzzle for us. So again, let players drive the process because you have all the pieces already ready to trigger behind the screen, and you can just improv away as the players figure out who to talk to. And so I call keys, secrets. And so a secret are the things that the players do not know at this point that are required to solve the problem. And so one tip here is to give everything a secret. It's a tip that I got a long time ago from Dungeon Magazine, from the Dungeon Craft column by Ray Winninger. And those articles have been archived for 2 decades on darkshire.net. You can find them all at this URL. Now, in that article, Ray talks more about giving all the aspects of your world a secret. So there are things to discover kind of like at random. So as the PCs explore, they're constantly given rewards of new exciting bits of information, new hooks to encounters and adventures, new leads for treasure and objectives and whatnot. But in this case, our secrets are the keys to solving the problem. So if we give our NPCs the keys to solve the problem that the players can then grab, then we have a really good structure there. And the purpose here is to roleplay the encounters so that the characters unlock the secrets and find the keys, as I've just said. So the ingredients are all about encounter, rewards, and missions. So in other words, in general, once your players embark on this plot, this roleplay-centric plot, they're going to have reasons that they're going to talk to people. They generally, unless they're blocked or frustrated, they're just not going to start talking to people at random. So that means that each encounter's reward is built in. And therefore the character's mission or why they're going to trigger an encounter is also built in. It's just intrinsic within the players. We want to talk to this person for this purpose. We want to talk to this NPC to find this information. So this part is basically done for you. Just follow the characters around and stay agile so that if you spot an opportunity to hand out a key in an encounter, then drop it in. Perfect. And the plot progresses. Now, another key tip here, this is optional. It depends a lot on your group. But for the most part, in my experience, players like tangible things to grasp onto. They need a mental framework of the game and what it is that they're pursuing in their progress. They need something to write on the character sheet. And they like to track things. They want to know how close they're getting to things. So objects, items, are the perfect way to make this kind of roleplay plot tangible for players. Like I've acquired something. I've acquired the holy symbol required for the ritual. Great, I can write the holy symbol on the treasure sheet, and we now know we've made this progress. For some reason, just in our minds, it's very easy to imagine this holy symbol and that their characters are carrying it around and they've got it, and this is the key to the part of the problem. Whereas if we're talking to people and we get some information and we're kind of trying to figure out what that information means, the context, its relevance, and how it fits into the puzzle, that's a little bit fuzzier for us to wrap our heads around. And so for players who don't like to role play or who like clear objectives and clear status reports on how they are faring, then that fuzzy role play stuff is going to drive them crazy. They're not going to have a good time. But if we add objects, then these players have that tangibility and it will make them happy. And so you kind of get a nice blend there. You get the role players happy with all the role playing going on, and you have the more quest driven and physical characters or players happy that they have these things to track and think about and pursue. And so it also makes this easier for encounter design on your part. So you know that you need, say, the keys to solving the problem in part requires 3 items or 4 items, 10 scorpion tails, whatever it is. And so now you can make your encounters involve them, because by default most game masters started their careers with objects, with treasure chests, with magic items, with physical things that are the result of the reward of an encounter. And so we can still apply that thinking. It doesn't have to be so vague. And so it makes it easier for some of us to design our encounters. Great, where do I put the holy symbol? How do I make it put an encounter around that so that the players acquire it so they can get closer to the solution? And then physical stuff is also easier to place on maps. And so for some game masters who love the map-based approach, the numbered keys and the contents of each location and whatnot, then you can consider these objects as treasure, and then again that mindset becomes easy to follow. All right, and so part of our recipe, we need to create obstacles. So in other words, this is we need a challenge in the encounters to create the uncertainty and the possibility of failure. If there's no possibility of failure, there's no tension. And the whole point of this is to create tension so that even the non-role players, we hope to engage and get them leaning forward and leaning into the game because there's a challenge for them. There's something for them to figure out. And so physical objects. Oh, sorry, wrong section. And so by creating roleplay obstacles, then the roleplay itself becomes deeper. We add that kind of extra level of interest, and then our cost of failure. Remember our trust list up above. Well, here's the cost of failure. They lose the trust, which is a form of setback. So either you have two choices as a game master if they lose an NPC's trust. You can make this information available through another NPC or agency, like they could find it in a book or something. Or you could say, no, this is the exclusive source of the information, and so the challenge for the players is to come back and think about how they can earn their trust. Or if this is an intensifier, and you've deployed this mid-encounter, and that results in loss of trust, and the characters are going to have to, players are going to have to think on their feet about how to reestablish common ground again and build that trust back up. So they could lose access to the NPC. The NPC might just withdraw and say, no, I'm not talking to you guys. Or they could summon the guards, right, if they're being harassed. Or they could deploy their minions or flunkies to block access to them in the future, the gatekeepers and whatnot. So cost of failure here, in a roleplay sense now, is quite tangible. We could also turn NPCs into enemies. So we could say that someone was neutral or an ally. Well, then getting information from them is quite easy. And part of the game is knowing which NPC has what information, so we know who to go to and ask the right questions. Our NPCs aren't going to line up in front of the party and say, okay, this is the information I have, next. And then the next NPC is, okay, here's my information, here's my key. That's not going to happen. The players are going to have to figure out who to talk to and what it is that they need to get from the NPCs, and then how they will get that from the NPCs. And if we turn the NPCs into enemies because of bad roleplay, bad tactics, ideally for the players, because some players don't like the acting part, the roleplay part, and the conversation part. But if they understand the wrong move could turn NPCs into enemies, which results in information becoming harder to get, then those players have something very tangible to grasp onto. So role player, non-role player alike want to avoid turning NPCs into enemies because that makes their jobs harder, it takes longer, and it could play into the different kinds of intensifiers that you've got, like a countdown clock. Well, if this encounter has not gone well, they've lost that time. They've got nothing for their time. So how are they going to make up for that time? How are they going to get the information that they just missed out on getting within the remaining time? And it makes it harder to get keys. Ultimately, the cost of failure is harder. It's harder to figure out how to solve this problem. So the how is we want to create obstacles for them with a potential cost of failure. All right, now we're talking. All right, now we've got a good game going. And then in the article, I created a Mad Lib template just to give you a kind of a foothold of wrapping your head around creating encounters. So here's the template. Anything in square brackets you replace with the aspects of your plot that you've got outlined out. So we want to get information from certain NPCs so that we can unlock the keys to solve the problem. Just fill in the blanks, and that'll give you a head start in planning your encounters. And also, if you keep this Mad Lib encounter template on hand, then you can make it. You can GM dynamically, be an agile GM, and just improv. So the players say they talk to an NPC that you weren't thinking about ahead of time, or completely unexpected, or an NPC you made up on the spot. And they say, for example, hey, you're walking down the street. It's a pretty busy street. Player says, oh, are there any vendors? You say, yeah, there's a few that are selling food and items. And one is a book vendor. And so the mage goes, oh, book vendor, I'm going to talk to them. And you think, oh, crap, there was no book vendor in my plans or in my thinking about this. And I don't want to waste game time, or I do want this time to be used to progress the plot. So now what do? Great, I'm going to roll out my Mad Lib encounter. This book vendor now has certain information that they will relate to certain keys that relate specifically to the problem, and fill in the blanks on the fly with some notes that I'll show you in a moment to take, and that'll help a lot in helping you improv such an encounter and keep the role play going. And so next, we have a little bit of our recipe here. This is just the summary, and the example that I'll show you next, I think, will take all this kind of abstract theory and put it into a not only concrete example for you, but how to make notes and how to build out the adventure outline so that you can actually turn this into a good tension-building roleplay plot. So, in summary, our recipe here is we want to create a problem that gets more and more difficult to solve. So we're going to throw intensifiers into the problem, and we're going to throw intensifiers mid-encounters as momentum shifts to make the encounters really interesting and more challenging in a pure game sense. And then we're going to create keys or ways that they can actually solve the problem. Very specific things so that you're grounded in exactly what the characters need to pursue. And when we create the intensifiers, we're going to decide on the intensifier type, and then we're going to create the intensifier seed. So again, this is all about being more dynamic as a GM and being improv. So we're not going to create scripts. We're not going to create a rigid outline. They have to do this and then this and then this. Instead, we're just going to create these little bits of information, and then we're going to put them together like Legos as the characters talk to people. The outcomes of those encounters are determined, and you can figure out, okay, well, they don't have this stuff yet, so that's what I'll try to involve in the next encounters that the players will drive for me. So I just need to sit here and think about how I can drop things into an encounter that the players trigger on their very own. It's actually once you kind of get your head wrapped around it and start GMing this kind of a role play plot, it's quite not relaxing, but I don't know. I get peace of mind knowing that the players are responsible for driving this plot. I don't have to figure out everything myself. So this is our recipe summed up, and basically that's all the ins and outs of ramping up tension in a role-playing plot. And so here's our example. All right, we've got everything all fanned out here. Okay, here's the example plot and problem. How to remove the curse from the keep. And so this is not solvable in the first encounter. So the characters don't even, and the players don't even know that there is a curse, for example. So the first encounter needs to be to establish the existence of this curse. And so it's not possible to solve the curse in that one encounter. Therefore, we've checked the box. This problem is bigger than a single encounter. So it's good as a roleplay plot. We need at least 3 intensifiers. Again, these are like Lego pieces that you can drop in. So let's talk about stakes. Stakes type of encounter. The PCs learn that they are affected with the curse too. All right, so for example, gameplay goes on. You might have the players either pursuing some other plots, and then they learn of the curse, and then either that same encounter as they're talking with the NPC who reveals, yes, we are all cursed here, we refuse to leave, we cannot escape. Then the characters will say, so why don't you go about fixing the curse or something? And then during that conversation, the NPC says, hey, that's fine for you to say, but you are also cursed too because you've been here for a week. And now you've ramped up the tension. Now the players understand that they've got stakes in the game. They have to solve the curse not just to help their NPC friends or allies, or just to be good citizens to random folk, but they also have to solve this problem because they are now cursed too. So we've amped up the intensity of the problem, hopefully mid-encounter. Another intensifier that we could put in is a type of danger. So the solution to the curse has deadly guardians. So now mid-encounter the characters learn this key that are part of the solution is that they're going to have to bypass some kind of deadly guardian. So learning that, I mean, I've just abstracted deadly guardians. In the encounter itself, you would say, well, they're statues that are immune to normal weapons. and that even the brawniest barbarian, such as yourself, could not make a dent in these creatures, and you will surely die should you confront these creatures. Then now the characters are feeling quite nervous and are wondering about how will they overcome this challenge. So not only do they have to solve the curse, but we're stacking on an intensifier. We're stacking on now danger. We've got these statues to overcome. And then the third intensifier for our brainstorm here is another type of danger, and that is the entity that created the curse, the entity that placed the curse and placed the guardians intervenes. So whoever is responsible for this now jumps in mid-encounter and starts to parley with the characters. But because they are the originator of the curse, the characters either fear them as an enemy, or fear that they'll screw things up and repel this person, so they get no more information, because obviously the person who laid the curse has all the juicy information. So there's some really good stakes in that kind of encounter. So our some keys for the encounter. So these are the actual tangible things the characters must learn, acquire, and or do in order to solve the problem. And so all we do is create a bullet list of what this involves, like what these keys are, the secrets. So hopefully I explained that earlier quite well, but what the characters need to do to solve the problem is inside NPCs' heads, and therefore these are secrets from the character's point of view. The players do not know them. They have to uncover this information. And so what we do is we create a list of possible secrets, and then as the game unfolds, we just choose our opportunities to drop them into the game through roleplay. So, for example, the curse was created when the keep was created, and they need a book in the church library in order to learn this or to get more details on that. The ritual for the solution to the curse requires the holy symbol that has been lost by the church, a chalice that was used to create the church, so not any chalice, but this specific one, and then some ocean water. And so each of those could be different encounters. So in other words, in one encounter, they learned that there's a holy symbol that has been lost. And in the second encounter, they learned that there's a chalice that has been lost. And then in the third encounter, they learned that an ingredient is to go down the ocean and grab some of it. Or you could combine those all into one encounter. And technically, you could deliver them through scrolls, through art, through all the different ways that you drop clues. But again, we're creating a role-play-centric adventure. So therefore, ideally, NPCs deliver this information to the party. And then the ritual must be performed in the specific place, which is the dungeon temple under the church. And then with some very specific timing, the full moon. So now we have a countdown. So now how many days, the character is going to ask, how many days is it to the full moon? And you'll say, oh, well, that's tomorrow or next week. And now the characters have this time frame, which doesn't matter unless it's a truly generous time frame. They're going to feel tension. Now they're under the gun, and this is great. The more tension generated by your deadline or your complication here, the better. And then they learn the who. 3 people of certain bloodlines must. And so okay, what are the bloodlines and who has these bloodlines? Right, some really interesting things that the characters can investigate there. And then what must these people do? They have to, and this is the ritual recipe, basically have to touch the symbol and say some words, and then they have to use the ocean water as an ingredient in the chalice. And so this recipe in and of itself is a key. So they have to learn, okay, well, here's all the things we must do. But then each piece of information within this are separate keys, separate secrets. So you can really tease this out into a long adventure, or if you're doing something like a 5-room dungeon, it's just 1 or 2 simple conversations. Hopefully not so simple, actually. Hopefully with a good chance of failure and good stakes there. All right, and then finally the entity can be dismissed via bargain or leverage. So in my head, the creator of the curse could appear, or some kind of entity that is summoned by the ritual. And so how do they get rid of the entity? And so, here you could launch a combat encounter. I mean, the characters have been doing a great job of role-playing all this time. And some players might be antsy and wanting to roll some attack rolls and stuff, so you can make it a combat or continue on with the roleplay theme. And so then the keys to dismissing this entity or solving the curse, you've decided is either they can bargain with the creature or they have to have very specific leverage. And then, I mean, this is all, it's fractal in nature. Okay, what kind of bargains can they make? So that you can just repeat this entire process and turn the bargain into a series of keys and intensifiers and a problem, a sub problem under the umbrella of the big one. And so you could just make this as complex or as simple as you like. But these are the specific keys now that you can just keep a note of. And then as the gameplay opens up, you just look for opportunities to drop this information. And then for physical things and locations, you place those on your map, and you can have them appear ahead of. You can design those ahead of time, or you can just wait for opportunities to drop them in when you think it's a good time. Like, oh, it actually is in the basement of the tavern, this place, because the characters keep going to the tavern or something like that. So yeah, you can make this very dynamic and improv. So again, let players remember to drive the gameplay. They get to decide who to talk to and about what. All you need to do is make the NPC's existence known. And then it's up to the players to solve the problem of how do they find the NPC, or how do they approach them, and what do they want from the NPC. False leads are okay, meaning that if you have setbacks and certain NPCs have wrong information, because this is a roleplay plot, players can generally accept. Okay, let me finish my sentence. It's a roleplay encounter, so they can use other NPCs to validate the information. So unless the false lead is about that final win state, I would avoid that, right? So they try the ritual, but it doesn't work. It fizzles out. They got one piece of the puzzle wrong. If you have a deadline, then you've kind of screwed the plot over, because now the deadline is passed, presumably, and now there's no hope, right? They've failed at the problem. Now, if you do that and your players are fine with failing a mission, great. They'll hopefully better luck next time. Maybe you have a follow-up adventure where they can fix it through some other avenue or something. So that's fine too. But in general, you don't want to put false leads into the final climactic encounter, because it's harder to the characters will just automatically fail. There's not a whole lot of fun in that in most circumstances. But you could say, okay, well, this NPC knows this information, like can unlock this key for you. And then they go talk to that information, and then they talk to that NPC, and the NPC doesn't have that information. Okay, false lead, quickly snuffed out. They go back, or they try a different tack to find out who they actually have to talk to. So that kind of thing, perfectly okay. Incorrect approaches are okay. You can remain flexible. You can be forgiving. Like if the PCs are jerks, you can have the NPC have higher emotional intelligence and not take offense and still be helpful. Or you could have some consequences to that. They lose the trust. It becomes harder. You add an intensifier, makes it even worse. All these are now in your toolbox to use as you like, and it is okay if the characters approach an encounter in a way that you didn't expect, that you think is a bad way, because NPCs are very forgiving, and you can allow them to be successful, or you can turn them into false leads or walls they have to divert around. And then I think of it as like the game Clue with regards to false leads and incorrect approaches. So in the game Clue, you need the person who did it, with what weapon, and in what room. And so then when a player challenges that, they say, okay, I've got it figured out. They go to the room and they've got the weapon there, and they've got the person there, the murder suspect, and they say, I've solved it. I've got it's Colonel Mustard with the chandelier in the ballroom. And then a player goes, no, you're wrong. And that's great. Now we have like a logic problem. Okay, I know that one or more of my assumptions here is incorrect, and the adventure continues. So I kind of think of this like running the game of Clue. Up until, of course, the time where they actually need to solve the problem, and that should that be like a one-off thing, like I said, then that's not good. But if they can have multiple stabs at the solution, then you can even make the game of Clue relevant to the final encounter. Did we solve the problem this time? Okay, we do the thing and the thing and the thing. Okay, no luck. Okay, we'll go back. We'll revisit. We'll talk to some of the NPCs again and try to figure this out. All right, so that was a whole lot of rambling. I hope it made a little bit of sense. You can read the full article here. I think if you use this recipe, create a problem, create some intensifiers, and then create the secrets and keys to unlock it, then you will have a really good roleplay plot. And most importantly, and the purpose of this whole thing is that you have a way to build tension in a roleplay plot. It's not just a series of conversations. And then you can make individual encounters with those roleplay, with those NPCs much more challenging. And you can also make getting to the problem much more challenging with the structures and things that I've suggested here. So good luck. I hope you try this out in your campaign. And if you do, please give me an email and let me know how it went. Yeah, thanks for your time.